Good evening, good evening. As you heard, my name's James. I'm basically a vicar with L Plates. I'm a work in progress. But I'm here really to serve the church, and it's really good to be here tonight. Many of you will know that it was Super Saturday yesterday. Anybody watching the rugby? A few of us. Well, I decided that I'd head to the Principality and I'd take my daughter Hazel, who was just born 3 weeks ago, to go and watch the Welsh game because she was born in Heath Hospital. She's a Cardiffian, so I wanted to take her along to see her nation winning. And what happened? We had to wait till late into the half time, at the end of the second half, to see the tries coming. Unfortunately, though, she pretty much slept through the whole thing in a way. But it was meant to be a Super Saturday, but it was more of a troubling Saturday for the Welsh nation. But many of you perhaps were following other nations. England, not so great, were they? Not so good. How about Ireland? I think they may be the winners this year. So well done to those who are wearing green today. But we are in Lent, which is a time of getting ready for Easter. And we believe it's a season of preparation for us at Citizen. And it's a time, really, of preparation. And we want to get ready for all that God has got in store for us. And we've heard some challenging talks recently. We heard Henry was preaching about pain. We've heard about weakness. We've heard about all sorts of really challenging topics. And so that we can look at ourselves and ask, am I ready for all that God has called me to? And so today we are exploring what it means to get ready in suffering. And I'm aware that all of us here in this space will have different experiences of suffering, whether it's personally or through a friend or through a colleague or through family, or just through living in this world. And I want to say that they're all valid experiences that have affected us and influenced us. And why sufferings exist in the first place is by no means clear. It poses a real moral problem for us, especially if we believe in a God who is good, omnipresent, and kind. So how do we get ready in suffering? I mean, this last 2 weeks, I've been seized up with a back injury. It was a bit tricky, actually. It happened the other day, and I was in the middle of a bit of a situation, because Sunday, we had our baptisms. Who was there for that? It was great, wasn't it? Baptism Sunday, 9 people reaffirming and getting baptized. It was brilliant. But it's quite challenging if you're the one in the pool trying to do the baptizing with your back. And it was seized up. I've tried everything. I've tried heat, I've tried cold packs, I've tried painkillers, stretchers, I've tried some physio, you name it, I've tried it. And it affected me, and I struggled along. And in the week, this last week, I've just realized that suffering is really tiring. It can be really, really tiring. But we're reflecting on all that God has in store for me in suffering. It's easy for Lent to quickly become a season of self-comfort, self-reliance, and self-forgetfulness. So it was those quick, satisfying wins of chocolate mini eggs. Anyone got a fan of those? And hot cross buns, and those new types of eggs that are in the shops. You know, there's little cheeky, like little Bueno eggs. There's little hazelnut ones that I started to depend on for comfort. We have that problem. We want to seek our own self-comfort. I wonder, how are we going to prepare to get ready in suffering? And I think the best way to start is always by opening up the Bible and having a look. So let's turn to John 12, verses 20 to 33. And just before this, we've got Jesus who has just come into Jerusalem, and he's walking in on a donkey, a colt, and he's walking in, processing in, and people are looking at him and going, this could be the king who's going to sort out everything, sort out all the problems of this world. And so here we are in verse 20. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip then turned to Jesus. Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. It was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice from heaven, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said that it had thundered. Others had said an angel had spoken to him. But Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. And he said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. Are you troubled by something you are facing? Are you distressed by a particular trial you're going through or someone else is going through? If you are, you have a leader who understands. Jesus is getting ready to face death. And it says in verse 23, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. He is that grain that will fall and die on the ground so that it produces many seeds. The Bible invites you and me into Jesus' preparation for suffering. He isn't flippant. He isn't passive. He says, now my soul is troubled. My soul is troubled. It sounds like Jesus is doing a bit of soul searching. It's something that we all experience sometimes when things are a trial, where things are difficult. We start to go soul searching. So what does Jesus' troubled soul look like? Well, the best description we get is in Isaiah 52, where the prophet paints a picture of Jesus. It says, he is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. So this description in Isaiah is the description of the suffering servant. God himself becomes the suffering servant. God shows solidarity with us. God comes down to earth. I wonder, though, are you ready? Are we ready to follow the suffering servant? And how can we do it? Firstly, he models getting ready in suffering through praying his emotions. When was the last time you went to God troubled, giving him all of your emotions, giving it out, laying it out, giving it all, giving it stacks? Even here, this word troubled is a strong one. Shocked, agitated, even revulsion. And it echoes the book of Luke, when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. It says, being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. I wonder if that is for you, getting ready for Easter. Praying those prayers of deep emotional anguish and frustration, anger. And secondly, Jesus offers us a way through suffering. It's not really a utopia that he's just painting out, but it's through him. And like in Psalm 23, verse 4, it says, even though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they will comfort me. You see, when we go through the valleys, God is going with us through them. C.S. Lewis asks if the world is actually a veil of soul-making. A veil of soul-making. Perhaps that is what it's like to get ready for Easter. It's a season of getting our soul, going through that soul-making experience. Jesus himself goes through suffering with us. And we get ready in suffering by recognizing that Jesus is with us through praying our emotions. And I remember when I was just watching my grandma. She'd been suffering for about 5 years, and she was a bit of a stubborn grandma. I don't know if you guys have got people like that in your lives, family members who are a bit stubborn. But one day she was like, I'm going to go down into the basement. And she said, no, you're going to help me. So she fell down the stairs, didn't she? And then a week later, she was out walking to the orchard, and she came across a dog. And she got her stick out and waved it at the dog. And what happened? The dog bit her. And then it gets worse. A couple of months later, she's in the garden trying to do the laundry, getting the laundry up, and she falls over and she can't get out. She can't get up. And they hear her voice. The neighbor hears her voice and goes and helps her. But she spent sort of 5 years where she was just suffering. And watching her was really difficult, being alongside her. And I remember going to the doctors, and they said, look, I think there's an option here of potentially an amputation, but, she might die. And she kept living, and she's such a positive woman. She kept going and going, such a positive mindset. But then there was that day when I was in hospital with her, and she turned to me and she asked, am I going to die? What was I going to offer her? What was I going to say? So how do we get ready in suffering through Jesus? It's tough. I don't know what kind of sufferer you are. I don't know if you're a loud one, a quiet one. I don't know. Maybe you're like me. I've had this back injury that I've been struggling with recently, and I've been in the Llandaff fields. I cycle in from West Cardiff, and the pain has been brutal. And I've just been shouting and screaming like a madman on my bicycle. People must think I'm crazy. But perhaps it is just the shouting, the crying out in this season. And as Jesus gets closer to the cross, having come to Jerusalem, he cries out. And the second half is that it says, and what shall I say? What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. The Son here, the Son of Man, prays directly, earnestly, boldly, courageously to the Father. And he's getting ready in suffering. And it looks like letting God, as I said, letting God have it, letting rip. The NIV translation implies that these are questions that Jesus poses. But the Greek could be translated as a direct prayer. Father, save me from this hour. That's how it could be read. If he can pray, if the Son of Man can pray like that, a direct prayer, we can pray like that directly too. Even in the waiting, in the persevering, even in God's plan and purpose, he is open to we are open to what God has in store for us. There's a theologian called Sobrino, and he writes that in this ultimate solidarity with humanity, he reveals himself as the God of love, who opens up a hope and a future through the most negative side of history. So why does God create this negative side of history? Suffering may be this consequence of God's decision to create a universe of a particular kind, but he actively shares in the experience. He sends down his Son, who is the suffering servant. Karl Barth explains that God's own heart suffered on the cross. It was no one else but God's own Son, and hence the eternal God himself. I don't know if that gives you some relief, that it is the God, the eternal God, that is the one who knew suffering. It does for me. And sometimes it is the suffering that is too hard to bear. But we were reminded that it is God himself, Jesus, who takes it. It even says in verse 26 that whoever serves me must follow me, and wherever I am, my servant also will be. Wherever I am, God is with us in suffering. Jesus promises he will be there with us as we serve him, as we follow him. But I couldn't stay beside my grandma all day. I had to go back to work. I had to get back on the train. I had to go on living my life. And then I got a phone call, didn't I? I had that phone call, that dreaded phone call. And my mum just said, she told me the news. And I was initially angry that I had missed her, that I'd missed that moment. But I was glad her suffering had stopped. It's amazing that God has created us in that way, that suffering can cease. The poet Mary Oliver wrote, "Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." Is suffering a gift? In verse 32, Jesus says, "But when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself." And he said this to show the kind of death that he was going to die. You see, we don't need to be the rescuer. Jesus is the one who has come to rescue all, to draw all people to himself. So as we get ready in suffering, we recognize that the cross redefines everything. It redefines everything because Jesus has suffered pain voluntarily, purposefully for humanity. And Jesus did not brush over the issues and difficulties of human existence. He came into suffering. He came into a world of darkness and dealt with the reality of evil, of suffering and selfishness by willingly experiencing crucifixion. So as we get ready for Easter, that great day where we will sing happy, happy songs, we are getting ready. So where is God in all the suffering? I don't know about you, but my instinct is to run and hide from suffering. But that isn't ultimately a Christian instinct. Those who follow Jesus will slowly grow to not only accept suffering, but to welcome it. That's mad, isn't it? To welcome suffering. But we are part, what we're doing there, we are following the suffering Savior as a way of knowing the suffering Lord more intimately, as an offering of worship to the suffering God in prayer, and as an act of witness to a suffering world. So suffering and receiving God's comfort enables us to be a blessing to other people. So when we follow the way of suffering as a suffering servant, we remain in his presence and he comforts us. This is the good news. John 14:16 says, "And I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever." The comforter is with you forever. And as I was sitting with my grandmother in that season, I knew the comforter's presence with me. I wonder if she felt that same presence. I remember my mum calling me on the phone. She told me the bad news, but she also said that there was a peace in the room. I wonder if we need to make space to allow the peace and the comfort of the Lord to come into these experiences of suffering. So we can get ready in suffering through Jesus, praying to Jesus and receiving his presence, the comforter. And it's with us forever. It's not like a mini egg that you just pop in your mouth and it's gone in a second, or maybe even a hot cross bun that takes, 1 or 2 or maybe 4 bites. I don't know. Some of you guys might be able to do it in one, but I won't point out who. But finally, we get ready in suffering through witness. And in May 1963, Martin Luther King, the American Christian minister, activist, and political philosopher, wrote this letter after a children's march against segregation. He said this: "We must try to say to our white brothers all over the South who are trying to keep us down, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with our soul force. We will not hate you, and yet we cannot in good conscience obey your evil laws. Do to us you will. Threaten our children, and we will still love you. And we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer and still to love. In winning the victory, we will truly win our freedom. We will so appeal to your heart and your conscience that we will win you in the process." I love that idea that we can be that community as that example of Martin Luther King here, having that capacity to keep persevering through suffering, to win people, to change the world. And that is exactly what he did. So when we're in a suffering world, we can witness to the love of Jesus. We see in verse 21 that people want to come and see. We're getting ready for Easter, aren't we? Come and see. We've got invitations. We're going to be inviting people. And in verse 21, it says that people wanted to come and see Jesus. Even the God-fearers who have got interested in Judaism, it's popped up their interest. We would like to see Jesus. And the Greek here, to see, means to have an interview with. These guys want to interview Jesus. I wonder if there are people we know that want to interview Jesus. I think there are. I'd love to ask him lots of questions about suffering, about evil, about all sorts of questions that we toil with. But it takes a community of witnesses to draw people to Jesus, to invite people in. And it says in verse 22 that Philip went to tell Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip told Jesus. So it takes a community of people to invite, to allow them to to speak to Jesus, to bear things, to give things, to pray things, to ask questions. So we invite people to Alpha to help people to see Jesus in a suffering world. And we want to play our part in bringing people home to meet Jesus, and who became the suffering servant, to share the sufferings that point to Jesus, who is drawing all people to himself. And it will even change the world and win people and win people's freedom. So finally, how do we get ready for Easter in sufferings? Well, God, who entered this suffering world in Jesus and suffered and died, and not only with us, but for us, through his suffering, he can offer us redemption, forgiveness, safety, and community. So I wonder if we want to receive his comfort, his strength, his truth in our struggles and in our pain, and point us towards a hope-filled future, a home with him beyond the grave, where we can be with him, comforted and loved, enjoying eternity beyond the reach of pain. And he is only a prayer away for every single one of us. In the words of Jesus in Revelation 3:20, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me." I wonder if you have that sense of his voice speaking personally to you. Might you open the door, allow God to come into the room, to comfort you, to give you peace, to show you a way through whatever you are going through.